Peace, family. Y'all know who it is. It's none other than your boy, Dr. Bakari K. Lumumba, the regenerative LumumbaSpeaks.com, in conjunction, of course, with Bequaline Network, the Pan African social media extraordinaire, and the home of African centered news and information. And we're back on a Sunday afternoon. We hope you all are having a great Sunday, by the way, to have a conversation regarding an issue that I believe is extremely pertinent to African people, particularly our brothers and sisters in Togo. Before we get started, family, if you're watching, make sure you hit the subscribe and like button. Thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. Make sure you hit the notification bell as well. You're watching LumumbaSpeaks.com, a Black empowerment initiative where we believe we gain a competitive advantage by always betting on Black, in conjunction with Bequaline Network, the Pan African social media extraordinaire, and the home of African centered news and information. And if you can, be a blessing to the show, right? You can hit us on, of course, Venmo, Cash App at Lumumba Speaks, Venmo at the Lumumba, and of course via the Super Chat. So definitely want to give everyone a chance to tap in, be part of the conversation. And what we're really going to be sharing some pertinent information this Sunday afternoon regarding why we should support the Togolese people, particularly the issue regarding why Faure must go. So definitely, family, make sure you hit that subscribe and like button, and then we're going to dive in. I will put the link in the chat. The link, of course, is in the description, but I'll also put the link in the chat. So if you want to tap in and be part of the conversation, number one, put a one in the comments if you are familiar with what's going on in Togo. Put a two in the comments if you're unfamiliar. So we always want to make sure that we are, of course, a space for African centered news and information. So put a one in the chat if you're familiar with what's going on in Togo. Put a two in the chat if you're unfamiliar. So definitely want to make sure we're getting some engagement, family. But so put a one in the chat if you're familiar with what's going on in Togo. Put a two in the chat if you are unfamiliar with what's going on in Togo. As many of you may be aware, Togo is a West African country just east, of course, of Ghana, south of Burkina Faso, and just west of Benin. Right, it's a rather small country. Agriculture is its economic base. Unfortunately, it's one of the least developed nations in the world, not just on the continent. It is a very small country with a width of only 71 miles. So, of course, as many of you may be aware, the background of the history of Togo, it began as a German colony. However, when Germany was defeated in World War One, there was the Treaty of Versailles. Um, it became a French colony, and as a result, um, they were colonized by the French until they gained their independence in 1960. Um, but definitely, family, we want to hear from you all. So once again, put a one in the chat if you are familiar with the issue facing the Togolese people right now. Put a two in the chat if you are unfamiliar. Definitely want to hear from you all regarding that issue. Um, just know if you all are cognizant of what's going on. Then, of course, we will move a bit deeper and actually get into, of course, the conversation. So definitely, family, want you all to do that. Um, and then we're going to go ahead and move forward. So the link is in the chat. The link is in the description, as you all are very much aware. Um, of course, we're going to move forward. I'm going to share. Number one, there is some literature written by, of course, the resident historian here at Lumumba Speaks, and that is, of course, uh, Brother Dwayne Onwale. He's the resident historian, as many of you are familiar, here at LumumbaSpeaks.com. Um, and according with Beacon Network, we always argue that he is what your favorite historian's favorite historian. I say Black Power. And Brother Dwayne is rather prolific writer. He's written, I would argue, nearly 30, and this is not, or subterfuge here or hyperbole, but nearly 30 books, if I can recall correctly, nearly 30 books on African diasporic history, or even contemporary issues, particularly politically. So we're going to highlight Please forgive me, family, was having some technical difficulties there. So we're going to highlight one book that he's written regarding this issue. So, as you can see here, Farm Must Go. This is it's a paperback. You can get it on Amazon. Uh, Published June 11, 2018. Farm Must Go, of course, by the domain on Morale. Since 1967, the Togolese Republic has been ruled by an oppressive and brutal military dictatorship. During those 5 decades, the Togolese people have endured beating, torture, murder, poverty, and neglect at the hands of this government. On August 19, 2013, so you can see the people have been fighting back courageously for nearly a decade, particularly in this entity, right? We know that this is pretty, you can argue they've been fighting back and pushing back against this brutal military dictatorship since 1967. There are thousands of protesters took the streets, demanding an end to 50 years of being ruled by these same families. So all must go, of course, the history leading up to the August protests in Togo, as well as the challenges that the people of Togo face in a struggle against dictatorship. Also included in the book is an interview with Togolese activist Farida Nabourema, who co-founded the Fall Must Go movement, and who has played a very important role in bringing international attention to the plight of her people. So family, if you have not, I'm going to put the link in the chat to, of course, this text. Definitely. So Dubs one, you said you are aware of your thanks for that. So the link is in the chat. So if you want to purchase that book, definitely hope you can do so. One thing many people may be unaware when we talk about this dictatorial Togolese government is the Togolese government is supported not only by the good old US of A, but also by Israel, right? And so if you are someone who has American citizenship, we know even though African Americans who belong to this country are really denizens rather than citizens. But if you are in this country, you have citizenship, I would push you to, of course, like your local congressman, state rep, senator, etc., and say, hey, listen, this is an issue. We shouldn't be supporting a government that is violent, antagonistic, and brutalizing its own people. We know that the Nasty dynasty has been ruled the country for over 50 years, for the fortune the least developed African nations, unfortunately. And the people suffer as a result. Right? Many people uh, don't understand what it may be like to live under a brutal military dictatorship. There's an instance where books have been burned, right? So there's a push, emphasis to keep the population uneducated, unaware of the issues that are pertinent, right? We know that oftentimes we find this with the dictatorial regimes. There's a push to, of course, eliminate intellectual and, of course, access to information. Unfortunately, in many oppressive or repressive African nations, one of the things that is typically done to really quell the dissemination of information or even scare with the world what's going on. And they're just shut down the internet. Right? It is something that may be unheard of here in the Western world, but it is something that takes place, unfortunately, on the continent. But I think one of the things that we can do here in the West, particularly if you have citizenship, is writing your state down, right? Writing your state senator and expressing your pleasure with America provide using our tax dollars to support surviving an oppressive regime. So that is something to consider. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to read an article that speaks to this issue a bit. Give me 1 second. I'll pull it up. And share my screen again. Okay. So this article was written last year in June, right? Togo National dynasty faces youth-led protests. Togo's opposition claims further rallied after earlier anti-government protests led to dozens of arrests. Many, especially young people, reject a new order which could allow Faure to stay in power for good. We can really get into that. The Hands Off My Constitution Coalition of civic groups and opposition leaders in Togo have called for further protests in the coming days to oppose what is referred to as a constitutional coup. Since the introduction of a new political structure in June, President Faure can now remain at the helm of the country without any term limits. According to ULF, lacking the German Bernard Andronor Foundation, as well as an increasingly discontented opposition, many Togolese are concerned about the recent surge in prices. The hike in electricity prices was kind of a trigger of these protests, which broadly target the presidential family. Nassindi, which has been in power for 60 years. I said 50 families, so I am corrected, 60 years. There have been protests before, but this one looks relatively large. It's impossible to say where it's going, he added. Heavy-handed police response to raise the protest. A crackdown on dissidents saw over 80 people arrested early in June. During the first round of several-day rallies, police reportedly used tear gas against crowds. Activists also reported that protesters had been mistreated by security forces. Several people were beaten during their arrest. Amnesty International's office in Togo told the Associated Press in June. Press freedom is also under attack. Earlier in June, French international broadcasters RFI in France 24 was suspended for 3 months for alleged lack of impartiality in their coverage of the protest. A journalist from French public broadcasting TV5 was even held without charge at a police station for several hours when he was found. Authorities reportedly deleted photos he had filmed at a rally. West Africa's dynasty, one of the smaller states in Africa, Togo has been a republic since gaining independence from France in 1960. The country's founding years were marked by successive coups d'etats, ultimately resulting in Ayadema and Nasindi taking over in 1967, and hanging on to power until his death in 2005. Single-party rule and a personality cult for the leader marked that era. Of course, and this is him here. He ruled with iron fist from 1967 until his death in 2005. His son Faure succeeded him to the presidency, with staunch support of the military and repeated claims of election rigging. Presidential elections slated for this year were canceled last year in favor of a constitutional change to allow Nassingbe to stay in power indefinitely, adding that while the leader had created an image of demoting himself to essentially a prime minister, he had consolidated more power in his new role as president of the Council of Ministers. Two of Togo's opposition parties, the National Alliance for Change, Democratic Forces for the Republic, have publicly demanded Nelson be stepped down, saying he must return power to the Togolese people to whom national sovereignty belongs. Togolese now want the end of this regime, which can no longer offer anything to the people after 20 years of absolute and repressive power to Faure and Nelson, the representative of hands-off and not constitution control, the AFP. Young people, fed up with the status quo over the years, protests over the dynastic rule of the Nascendis have resulted in the deaths of several hundred Togolese and displacement of thousands in the past, most notably after the 2005 elections and following anti-government protests in 2017. The reason that 2024, two people were killed during protests held against the long-term ruler. This is a particular issue. Now people are protesting on the streets of the capital Rome and beyond following the final switchover to the parliamentary system last month. This time, however, they are led by the country's youth. Togo is a very large country. Most people are under 30. Adding up the protests were largely coordinated on Facebook and social media, with young people being taken to the streets, but it doesn't seem to be very organized. 90% follow, etc. So as you can see, family, this is a thing, violent and repressive regime. Unfortunately, in Togo, I do know that we had a brother before who asked the question, what are the goals of Pan-Africanism? What's the next step? And I think that's a great question. We know Pan-Africanism has gone through several iterations, right? One that is, of course, the Middle Passage. Right? We see the coalescing of African identity into Black diasporic identity. And of course, Sister Shy, how you doing? Appreciate you, sister. Into a Black diasporic identity. Okay. And then, of course, as a result, we found numerous, over 500 documented football insurrections that took place during the course of the Middle Passage. Moving forward, we had what was known as, of course, once Africans did disembark here in the Western world, the New World, we found what? Slavery and a long for one's homeland, right? There was a push for repatriation. Afterwards, there was to fight for, of course, independence. Right? This was followed by, of course, nominal independence, what many called flag independence. And now we see this push for African people to be able to live independent of what foreign interference, specifically in economically, but also a push for good governance. Right? We know that one of the prevaricating tales of regarding African people during the course of Morocco was that we we lack the capacity to govern ourselves. Anyone who has a working knowledge of African history knows that that is at first facts and a historical But oftentimes it's justification used not only for colonialism and enslavement of African people, but for the continued focus of undermining African people's sovereignty, not only on the continent, but also in the diaspora. Right? We've been a member of several agencies in Haiti, the community as well. So that's just a brief, historiography regarding Pan Africanism. But one of the end goals is good governance, and I've expressed frustration as to what is the lane on several occasions regarding we were early enough political development. Hey, we need someone that's coming in and basically has a dictatorial frame of reference where you got to do what I say or else. And that sounds good, right? Particularly when you're frustrated with the lack of democratic governance. But what that tends to create is a power vacuum when not pushing transition. This is analogous to, uh, and you say organized crime, the mafia, right? La Costa Nostra, right? Where we find a situation that when the boss transitions or is deleted, now there's a power vacuum amongst kind of capos, but maybe even the underboss, of who will be the next boss, right? We don't need that in Africa. We've had successive coup after coup after coup after coup, and it hasn't tangibly consistently over a longitudinal frame of reference improve the lives of Mexican people. And so the focus, I believe, must be democratic government. So once again, family, tap in. The link is in the description, link is in the chat. I'm also going to share this article. I'm going to read this article by Human Rights Foundation that really censors the work of Sister Farida Nabourema. Butchering her name, please forgive me, but Sister Farida. So I'm going to share my screen here. Said, Mr. Chairman, I like the development of Togo. Faure is okay with me. Maybe I will feel different as a citizen. Well, I said, so here's an issue, Brother Sandman. Happy you're tapped in, but the Togo is one of the least developed nations in the world, not just the continent. It's extremely, severely underdeveloped. And many argue this is done purposely, particularly by the Ganassi family, in which they cipher all of the wealth and income of the country to purposely undevelop the nation. So the development in Togo, you can argue that for the most part, there isn't any development. As far as we know, at the head of a brutal dictatorship in which they're literally killing people who are protesters, right? Many people have taken umbrage of what's taking place in Iran with the Ayatollah, which of course um, the leading citizens, right, who are protesting. But the same thing is going on in Togo. So I would strongly push back that Nepal is okay. Right? He's deleting his own citizens when they are rightfully protesting. This is not a situation in which they're being influenced by outside actors. So the CIA is trying to pull the strings. No, this is organic, where brothers and sisters there fed up with the repression, fed up with the lack of development, fed up with, of course, president for life, right? Fed up with, of course, there being um, shady elections, right? And they want change. So I would definitely push back against that. Just so you can tap in and be part of the conversation as well. So let me share this one moment. Okay, so as you can see, this is Sister Farida Nabourema. This is an article in Human Rights Law. Came out June of 2018. She's been putting in work for quite some time. For quite some time. She's been putting in work for quite some time. So fighting for democracy in her country has come at a high price. She's had to sacrifice her family, friends, and her safety. Now Nabourema has lived in exile from her childhood home in Togo for 10 years, speaking out against the regime of Faure Nassembi, whose family has ruled the West African nation for more than 50 years. During the Nassembi dynasty, Togo became one of the poorest countries in a place characterized by a crackdown on freedom of speech and dissent. The U.S. State Department recently raised concerns about rising levels of violence in the country and restrictions on free speech. Now, Nabourema had an early introduction to the regime through the tactics from her father, was arrested in 2003 for opposing the regime, she said. Right? Okay, so so yes, this was also carried by CNN to politics. So my father was a student activist in the 1970s, calling for political change in the country. Togo was then ruled by the current president, Faure Nabourema, who came to power in the 1967 coup, 7 years after the country's independence from France. Every day during his rule, people had to queue from the military camp where he lived to the presidential palace. The cat packed for him in the morning, the afternoon, and the evening, Nabourema said. Nabourema recalled her father's experience at the hands of the elder Nabourema. My father was first arrested in 1977 for distributing pamphlets calling for political change. In 1985, my father was arrested again. He had electric cords wrapped on his genitalia and was tortured till he lost his voice. Let me read that one more time, family. This is from Sister Farida. I know her personally. I've spoken with her on the phone. We video chatted. Let me read this again. In 1985, her father was arrested. He had electrical cords wrapped around his genitalia and was tortured till he lost his voice. When he lost his voice, a soldier said he is not screaming anymore, probably because he was not feeling the pain anymore. So they started hitting him, so they broke 13 of his ribs. He continued to have run-ins with the law. In 2003, when Nabourema was 13, the father was arrested along with 28 others, attending a meeting to discuss opposition to National Day. He was released 3 days later, but the message was clear. He was expected to live in silence under the shadow of an oppressive regime. In 2005, we know the elder Nathan Day transitioned. After 38 years of rule, many Togolese were hoping for change, but he was immediately succeeded by his son, Faure Nathan Day, in what the African Union and rights group called a coup. Even though I was 15 years old, the powerlessness in the face of injustice revolted me to the extreme. Nabourema said. She joined her father's political party, Union of Force for Change, and started attending opposition rallies. 3 years later, she left Togo to study in the United States. In 2011, she co-founded the Faure Must Go movement that has since become a hallmark of the Togo people's struggle. Her family members were immediately threatened by government loyalists, and they became frightened for their safety. My siblings who I was living with at the time asked me to leave. I was 20 years old in a foreign country, but I pulled through and never allowed it to pull me down. Togo lies between Ghana and Benin, and the west coast of Africa, around 60% of its population is under 25, and many of them have only known one ruler. I would call my sister telling me Togo's people are not ready for a revolution. I told her that no one is born ready for a revolution. You have to prepare them for it. With social media, Nabourema started writing about the regime, denouncing what she considered violent atrocities, the continued injustice, encouraging young Togolese people not to ever give up on freedom. Government accused her of being a troublemaker. In 2014, I published the personal contact numbers of all members of Togo's parliament. I asked my compatriots to call the members and ask why they had voted against the bill to reinstate presidential term limits. I called the majority leader who insulted me and then abruptly hung up the phone. I shared a recording of that call on social media, and it soon went viral. A few days later, Parliament held a session in which they complained about not being able to sleep because they were harassed by hundreds of phone calls. Of course, they retaliated with personal threats, intimidation, and smear campaigns to depict me as a prostitute, a porn star, a fraudster. The more they tried to destroy me, the more my followers grew, and the stronger I became, he says. Life on the run, taking on the might of the regime has meant a life on the run for Nabourema, who now has limited contact with her family. She says she has received numerous death threats and online abuse since starting her movement. The past few years, I've moved around every 2 to 3 weeks, and sometimes even less, she says. We usually pick countries that are not led by dictators. Nabourema says she usually shares information about a particular country after she has left it, but she is extra careful in African countries. Police in Ghana once called me for questioning and told me we reserve the right to refuse you entry in our country if your political actions cause diplomatic tension between both nations. No country wants to host an agitator. These were the words of the Accra Regional Police Commander last August when they called me in for questioning, and I was questioned by 9 officers. She recalls, CNN is unable to independently verify this account. On some occasions, I have to go to countries I know nothing about, where I know no one and can't speak their language. But these are the places I feel safest because no one knows who I am. However, there were times that I got very ill, she adds. They were the most challenging and depressing times. The fear that I will actually die a natural death or running away from political assassins. So we'll stop right there, family. But as you can see, this is a pressing, this is a harrowing issue, right? In terms of what our brothers and sisters in Togo are facing. This is Sister Farida. She's of course shared some of the rather extremely provocative stories regarding torture and the fathers. And of course, we know the deletion of several brothers and sisters in Togo who are, of course, bravely fighting back, audaciously fighting against corporate oppressive regime in Togo. Mr. Sandman, what's the word?
Hey, what's the word? How are you?
I'm doing quite all right. Happy Pan African
Uh,
Sunday, brother.
Happy Pan African Sunday to you, brother. Um, yeah, I was noticing that during the program that your voice sounded a little bit muffled. Maybe like there was like a little bit of an issue with the microphone and stuff. I
Okay,
don't know if you could tell, that during the broadcast or anything like that.
okay.
Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah, I hear you just fine.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, I got the Pooh Shiesty the American flag mask on. I thought that would be a little bit antagonizing in the Pan African spaces, but I don't know. I thought no pun intended, but pun intended at the same time. Well,
Right.
yeah, and listen, and doing a little bit of research on the topic of today's subject about being in Togo. I did a little bit of a research. I listened to a speech that Farida Nabourema, is that how
Nabarama.
you spell
Yeah. Nabarama.
Nabourema, on a TED talk. And
Yes.
and personally, the feeling that I had was she felt, to me to me she sounded a little bit biased in her point of view. Maybe it's
Okay.
because she was, a citizen of, or maybe she still is a citizen of Togo, but I felt like she didn't have that much. Her opinion during the TED talk didn't seem sub objective. It seemed more subjective, and
Mm-hmm.
her from her point of view.
Could you provide an
Um,
example?
I don't know. It's hard to explain. It was just an intuition, like a gut feeling that I had, that the points that she brought up were more one sided, as opposed to like giving both sides of the argument. That was
Okay,
the initial.
so let me ask you this question. Um, the Nazimbe family has ruled Togo for 60 years. For 60 years. And they
Yes.
ruled with an iron fist, particularly militarily.
Hmm.
What positive what and it Togo is one of the least developed, it's one of the least developed countries, not just in Africa, but in all of the world. What
Hmm.
good could one derive from that?
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to get at. So, you know, I wouldn't just depend on, my own gut feeling on a situation like this. I decided to do a little bit more of an in-depth research
Mhm.
on the history of the country of Togo. Apparently, originally it was conquered by the Dahomey people, who were one of the biggest enslavers in all of the African, transatlantic slave time. After that, I believe they were conquered, or not conquered, or colonized by the Germans.
Correct.
And then after being colonized by the Germans, after World War One,
Right.
um, that place was Togo was taken. I guess it was purchased by the French and the British,
Correct.
and they had a huge what do you call it? They had a depression during the Great Depression. Well, I guess it was part of the whole entire worldwide depression, which caused a lot of like economic displacement or hardship in Togo, just because the whole entire world was going through that. And it just so happens that France and the British were their colonizers. And I think they finally got their freedom, or they made their own
Yeah,
constitution or what have you
1960. They
in
gained their
1960s,
independence in 1960. Yeah,
during when the embassy family, took over. Am I saying their names right?
it's
That the
okay.
monarchy. Yeah. So if you look at just the history of it, to go from being a slave state owned by the Dahomey to being bought and sold in the free market by colonizers in Europe, like in between the French, the British, and the Germans, and to have to start from scratch pretty much. You look at the development, is I don't think they really had much of an opportunity to really develop. I mean, they
Okay,
say
well,
the
hold on. So let's scratch development. Let's talk about
mhm,
human rights. Let's talk about torturing black people. Let's talk about imprisoning black people for decades without trial,
mhm.
threatening family members, killing people. That ain't got nothing to do with development. That's a problem.
Right, yeah. And I agree that is a problem.
It's
And
unacceptable.
I can't, like, I can't condone or defend anything like that, anything that's tormenting, or that has to do with the torment or the genocide of our own people on the continent. So I have no cogent argument for that. But like I said, um there's two sides of that story. I don't know all the history of
Well, I mean,
behind
but this is
those.
reality. I mean, this is
Yeah,
something that can be substantiated, right?
right.
These are situations in which if you speak out for, you know what, I mean, this is a military dictatorship. We don't live in a military dictatorship, but we do live in an oppressive country, particularly if you are unapologetically black or African. But what we do find is in Togo, if you speak out, and next thing you know, the police are at your house,
Right.
literally. I mean, they
Mm,
just killed a sister about a year ago. Right? What did they do? They stated that Sister Farida was a prostitute, a porno star. So, I mean, most people don't know what it's like to live under a military oppressive dictatorship. Right? Oftentimes, people romanticize these things, but it's not something that one can romanticize. Right? So we lost brother. Same man. I think he was having some technical difficulties. We'll get him back. But once again, as I said before, what we can do, and he is back, well, he's back. What we can do is write to our local congressmen, state senators, state representative, right, and say, listen, this is a problem. We have an issue. I do not want our tax dollars supporting this regime, this violent and oppressive regime, right? This deadly regime, right? They're being supported by Israel. They're being supported by the United States. And I would
right.
also add, as hypocritical, says my mic is a bit muffled. Okay, give me 1 second. I think I know what the issue is. Um, okay, can you hear me better now? Let me know a snapshot. Let me know if you can hear me better now, because turned off the background music. But the issue is, it's hypocritical as a Pan Africanist. We talk about a lot of issues, right? But if we don't address this, there's a problem, right? Right, because part of the goal of Pan Africanism is good governance, right? Is that we are independent. We are living our lives. We control the policy, the economics of our nation states, right? Independent of foreign interference, and that what we are governing our people in the interest of the people. I mean, we talk about the father and now the son. This is analogous to Papa Doc and Baby Doc in Haiti, right? They were getting all of this money for what? Development and aid, and we're keeping it for ourselves. And we're living a good life. We're living a high life. We remember with Baby Doc, his wife, who um, they're living in Haiti. This woman is having $5,000 fur coats imported in just to walk around in the palace wearing a fur coat, right? So we have to speak out against these issues, address these issues, and try to give as much support as we can. As I said before, and I've posted this, of course, on my platform, and I'm going to look to consistently post every week, where part of the work that Brother Dwayne was doing with the church, and I supported this work, and I financially supported this work, was water filters to Togo, right? We talk about would the best step be to take charge to the ICC and UN? Right, that's a great question. I wish Sister Farida was here. She's living, of course. I'm not going to, of course, divulge what country she's living in now, but there's about a 8 hour time difference. So I don't know if she's asleep already, but I don't want to wake her up. She probably is asleep already. I don't want to wake her up. But that's a question I would ask her. What would be the next step? How can we support the movement here in the States? Is it to go to the ICC, of course, the UN, right? Because once again, we least developed. So we're talking about just addressing basic needs, material needs, but brothers and sisters don't even have clean drinking water, right? But guess what? They got clean drinking water in the presidential palace. The people in government got clean drinking water, right? And one of the things that and I take umbrage with, and this is something that Thompson Carr, really exposed when he was president of Burkina Faso 40 years ago, was the issue with the chief. The chiefs support the president, right? And we know the chiefs, they don't have any real political power anymore, but what? They're cronies, right? They're still going around exploiting people. You got to give me XYZ amount of money, land, resources, etc., cattle, and people get nothing in return, right? So we tend to find that at least there is, in some cases, we see a history of oppressive governments being backed by chiefs, because the chiefs are, I mean, it's a pyramid scheme at the end of the day, right? I experienced this myself. I was able to see this handed when I was in Ghana at the beginning of the year. So these are issues that we have to address. And one of the two things that we can do is continue to support water filters to Togo. I will, of course, I will start posting every week. I will continue to put up a post about water filters to Togo, supporting that so our brothers and sisters have clean drinking water in Togo. Then number two, writing, of course, state reps, senators, congressmen, etc., about not allowing our tax dollars to support this violent and repressive regime in West Africa, in the country of Togo. So a snapshot reviews. Haven't heard from you in a while. I've been out of these YouTube streets, but we're back now. If you have time, but I'd love for you to tap in and be part of the convo. I think it's probably about 8 o'clock over there in the UK right now. If I'm wrong, please let me know. But make sure, family, if you're watching, you hit the subscribe and like button, thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. Hit that notification bell as well. You're watching, of course, LumumbaSpeaks.com and Black Empowerment Initiative in conjunction with Beacon Line Network, the Pan-African social media extraordinaire, and the home of African Center News and Information. To be honest, I wouldn't have known about this if you didn't bring it up. What are organizations like the African Union for? Should they not be addressing this? But the African Union has spoken out against the regime in Togo. But as we know, one of the prevailing and consistent critiques of the African unions that it is a toothless bulldog, right? And that's the number of reasons. Typically, if they make a mandate, they're unable to enforce their mandates. But the second issue is the African Union is primarily funded by, guess who? The European Union. So that can tell you how far we're going to get with that. Right, and so many people have criticized Sister Farida of, seeking. For example, she went to the State Department and she testified at the State Department about what was going on in Togo. And people are like, "Oh, you running the white people?" She says, "Well, I have to go to whoever is willing to help our people." It's not like we want that to be the case, but we have to go to whoever is willing to help our people who are living under very violent and repressive conditions in Togo. Yeah. So, and Malcolm X stated this, I believe, when he spoke at was it Oxford University? I think Oxford University, they have a tradition of people going to Oxford and debating. And Malcolm said, "I'm willing to work with anyone who is serious about helping us in our condition, right? Anyone who's serious about helping us overcome the conditions that we're living under." So I take the same position, particularly in a situation as oppressive and violent, right? As this, we're talking about people living in absolute poverty, while in Togo they're living in relative luxury, right? So, yeah, like I said, if you were living there, right? And Brother Sandman, let me ask you this question: have you been to the continent?
I have not. I have plans to
Okay.
go to Nigeria with Dinus, and yeah.
So I would say
So,
this much:
mm,
poverty here in the good old U.S. of A. and poverty in a developing nation looks completely different. So, for example, you could be impoverished in America. You could still possibly live in the PJs, also known as the projects. In the PJs, you're going to have what? Electricity, hot water. If you are impoverished living in a developing nation, there isn't any government housing, right? And the second issue is you more than likely may be living on the street. Literally,
Okay.
I've seen this with my own eyes, and
Right.
it is a harrowing sight to see,
Hmm.
right? And typically, when you're talking about repressive regimes, this is done purposely to keep people from gaining the capacity, right, particularly materially, to be able to rise up and fight back, right? We're talking about burning books. I talked to Sister Farida. She shared with me how they were burning books in the Togolese government was burning books so that people wouldn't have access to information. Right there, shut off the internet so people can't disseminate and get the message out about what's going on. Right, so it is extremely dangerous. Right, I would argue is analogous to uh, a black person during the Holocaust of enslavement, chattel enslavement in America. You're on the run, literally. That is analogous to that if you're going to take a stance in which you're speaking up against the government. So I think that's something to consider. Once again, we have the luxury, the privilege of living here in the West, right? We have certain, for example, we go without electricity for 2 hours. You know what I'm saying? We're about to lose our mind. What type of, we're hooting and hollering, right? We have those privileges, but unfortunately, in many developing nations, people don't have those privileges, right? So I think that's something to consider. But also, we have the benefit of we do not live in a country that is as repressive as Togo, right? A military dictatorship to where you literally could be clapped, deleted for speaking out, just like that. And guess what? There's no situation where, okay, we know police kill black folk. It's going to be a protest. You hire an attorney, try to take the person to trial. They may or may not be convicted or even arrested. Shoot. Your family knows not to say anything, or you next. You can argue this is analogous to living in the deep south or particularly Mississippi Delta, Alabama, Georgia, etc. Prior to the civil rights movement, or turn of the 20th century. What did our great Pan African historian he coined the term the what nadir of race relations in this book, seminal text, Betrayal of the Negro, from Rutherford B. Hayes to, of course, Woodrow Wilson. Right, turn of the 20th century in which anti-black racism was at its zenith. That's what we're talking about is going on in Togo right now for our brothers and sisters. You look the wrong way, they might get you out of there. Right, so I take extreme umbrage with anyone saying that Faure is okay. Two sides of the story, please. He's killing people.
Yeah, I mean this is pretty common in developing countries. It's not just something
No, it's
that
not
only
common in
happens in
developing
Togo.
countries. It's common in countries in which there is a violent, repressive military dictatorship.
But can you name a country that didn't start off as a violent, repressive military dictatorship?
Yes, Barbados.
Okay. Yeah, but I think that's rare. And if you look at the history of even the United States, we like you said, we have electricity and all that we need in these Western countries, but wasn't that long ago that if you went to New York City, maybe in the 1800s, and there were like people living on the little kids, living
Living
on
on
the
the street. Yeah, that was
streets.
100. That was 140 years ago. That is long
Right,
ago.
right,
That was
yeah.
140 years ago.
And whores all over the place, dumping their babies in the Hudson River. So, you know, I guess this is if you're if you're trying to develop a country in that manner, whereas though you're living in a modern society, I guess. And then like Togo, a lot of people are like migrating to the inner cities, right? Because Togo, it has a beautiful countryside, doesn't it?
But
Like
yeah, but it
you
doesn't mean
don't have
anything if people.
to.
But it doesn't mean anything if people are starving. Doesn't matter what it looks like. I mean,
You don't have to starve if you live in the country. That's what
No,
always
but see, this is why I asked you if you've gone to Africa. If you've gone to Africa, which I have on several occasions, what you will find is the poverty is absolute poverty when you go into the rural areas.
mm,
Absolute poverty. It's one thing to see poverty in a city, right? But at least
mm,
people might be able to try to hustle up. Unfortunately, we find there's also a phenomenon of family members letting their teenage daughters engage in sex work to make a living. Right, I saw it myself. It was extremely disheartening to see that, even though I had read about it before I got to the continent. But when you live in rural areas, you it's like, whoo, yeah. So when you say, oh, they don't have to, no. Like if you've been there, you would know. They really typically have no resources at their disposal at all.
right. So what confuses me then is how did we survive and been in Togo for thousands of years, as black people prior to colonialization in the countryside or even in our own fixed societies, but all of a sudden we're starving to death after colonialism. Like weren't we farmers and
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought that up. So when we talk about colonialism, one of the things that take place is they take control of the economy, right? And so what happens is, and I'm speaking in general terms, but we find this wherever colonialism took place, the goal is to make the people dependent on a colonial state, not independent. A great example will be here in the Western Hemisphere with Haiti. Prior to the invasion of the U.S. Marines that occupied the country for 19 years from 1915 to 1934, the Haitian economy was independent, right? They were exporting, right? What the United States government did was they restructured the economy to be dependent on American largesse, right? So, for example, Haiti had a independent agricultural, economy based around in part the black indigenous pig. The U.S. government came in and slaughtered all of the pigs and then forced the Haitian government to then have to import the white U.S. pigs. So these are the type of things that take place as a result of colonialism. So then now colonialism is ended and you have nominal, independence, what's known as flag independence. What then takes place is you have the elites who typically oftentimes are working in conjunction with the colonizers. This is how we got brought over here. Can the elites who are working in conjunction with the enslavers? What now there's a power vacuum there. They're fighting for who's going to be the head of government so they have access to what resources, right? But the power, the independent power of the economy were taken from the people during the colonial regime.
yeah, that's what I understand. It just seems like um if you don't want to live in a city and you want to live in a rural area, I don't understand why you can't just, build your own little towns and farm your sheep and stuff like that, or your cattle, and grow your own food.
Well, once again, you have that luxury in here in America. You don't have that luxury when you're living in a violent and repressive regime such as Togo. This
Right.
is something. There's a difference. Like when you're there and you see, you realize like, oh, people can't just go and say, "Hey, I'm gonna go do whatever I want," because it would be seen
Mm,
as subversive. Because what you're developing a level of autonomy and independence from the state.
yeah. Mm. Yeah, that's a violation of human rights, and
Exactly.
yeah, then that's something that should be brought up to the UN. And I can understand why, Farida Nabore uh, should probably, stay, hidden. You know what I'm saying? Because if the Mbisi family is considered, violators of human rights, then they could come under legal ramifications from the international government for, human violations against their own citizens for violent repressiveness and violent human rights. You can't just murder people because they're trying to survive, and that shouldn't be legal in any country in the world.
Right.
Yeah, but yeah, I don't know the whole story behind all of it. It's kind of a niche subject, but looking at the culture. And I did like a little bit of a research on the culture in Togo. It seemed like an interesting country. Um, the people. speak French. That's the
Yes.
national language. They're French speakers, but they also have a lot of niche groups that speak a lot of their own indigenous uh, languages. They in the south of Togo, I believe, is Christian, and then in the north of Christian, and the north of Togo, I believe there is Islam. They practice Islam, and then they also, practice voodoo in their country as
Mhm.
well. You know,
Yeah, in Togo, they actually have a voodoo festival, which that's one of the positives that you can say, particularly culturally about Togo and even in Benin, that these are just countries in which there still is a focus on traditional African religions as opposed to Abrahamic or colonizer religions.
so prior to the country of Togo, like what no, you don't call them tribes, you call them
Ethnic groups.
indigenous groups, ethnic group. Yeah, what ethnic group in West Africa do you believe those people come from? Are they like Hausa,
And
Igbo,
I
Yoruba
haven't done a
people?
deep dive on that issue.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, because it would seem like, if you feel that your country is getting oppressed by violent dictatorships, and the ethnic groups like the Yoruba, the Igbo are so large in West Africa. If they were to unify just as their own state, so to speak, where they work together, then that'd be something that can, help the people that are in Togo who might be getting oppressed, or they would have some type of representation. Like if they're starving, the people in Nigeria who happen to be from the same ethnic group could help them, with whether it be with food or with money or supplies to help them, survive.
right. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and let me answer this question by Snapshot Reviews. He states, have there been any attempted rebellions in Togo since he has been in charge? I'm not familiar with that, but I do know that there have been several, of course, protests. But as you guys understand, when you're living in a violent and oppressive country, it's very difficult to foment a rebellion due to the nature of the regime, right? Being violent, being repressive, right? Showing up at people's houses if they publicly speak against, of course, what the government is doing. So I think it's not as easy to do as one would imagine, right? And of course, many of us, had the privilege and the blessing of never having lived in a violent or repressive country as Togo. So, but we also know this country has been supported by the United States for quite some time. Part of it is because they want access to trade, but also because they believe that they will be a support against, of course, terrorism in the Sahel. We found the same thing in Haiti with Papa Doc and Baby Doc, where since they were opposed to communism, the U.S. government was willing to support them and give them millions of dollars in aid that, of course, never actually was used to develop the nation, and take a ton of blind eye to the human rights abuses that were taking place amongst their governments and regimes. So we see that this is something that typically done by the West. They support these type of dictatorial, autocratic leaders on a regular basis, as long as they're getting something out of it.
Yeah. So, like, if you were to go to China, right, and there are probably a lot of people in China who would, consider the Chinese government um, a dictatorship or oppressive dictatorship. If you were to speak out against the Chinese government as a citizen of China, I don't know if they were like, assassinate that person, or if they would, but they would definitely, you know, um, penalize that person if they were to speak out against the government. And they do control access to public information that their citizens have. But it appears that a country like China has, had, development, international development with the wealth, and then, it's the second biggest economy in the world, so to
Correct.
speak. Um, what do you think is the difference in between a repressive dictatorship like China as opposed to a repressive dictatorship like Togo?
Well,
or do you think?
I can't make a comparison, an apples to apples comparison, because I haven't looked at China in that light. But also, I just want to make sure that we're keeping the focus on what's going on in Togo. So, and that's not to dismiss your question. I just can't answer it because I haven't looked at China in any way, shape, or form, right? So just I'm not dismissing your question. I just can't answer the question, but I also want to keep the focus on Togo. That's real quick. Mr. K says, I always say if war is a racket, like Smedley D. Butler said, then the Western age of Africa is also a racket. Absolutely, absolutely. So, is Mr. K, were you familiar with what's going on in Togo right now? So, please let us know if you were familiar with what's going on in Togo. Yeah. So, once again, I apologize, Mr. Sandman. I don't want to dismiss your question, but I'm not able to answer it.
Yeah, I mean, that's totally understandable, and that makes sense. I was just thinking that the reason why I even drew that analogy is because it seems like a lot of some of these countries in Africa tend to want to follow a lot of these communist or dictatorship type societal um, development type strategies because they feel that democracy isn't working for them. Um, So I don't know. Maybe that's an issue. Maybe they're looking at it and saying, "Well, we don't have time for a civil justice warrior like a Farida to impede our progress as a country." But if
That's the thing. I don't think democracy is impeding the country's progress. I would argue that the dictatorship is impeding the country's progress because there's no checks and balances. The person is able to do whatever they want, and they're working against the actual benefit of the nation state. They're working only to the benefit of themselves. So we're looking at what one would call political graft.
hmm, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, we wish we could like have more information on the subject. Like you said, it's a little bit of a niche subject because we don't talk about Togo a lot.
Right. And it's a
Because
very small
this.
nation, only
Yeah,
8
right.
million people, right? 71 miles long. I mean, in width, right? It's a very small nation. But once again, I think any place where African people are suffering is a cause for concern for someone who truly is a Pan Africanist.
Mm, right. Yep.
Yeah. So, Mr. K, I saw you said just on the surface, understood. As I said, it is a small nation, but people are suffering. So, uh, Dr. King said injustice anywhere is a what threat to justice everywhere. Mr. Sandman, a great African scholar to read about for a deep dive on the politics of African governance is Godfrey. Yes, I don't want to butcher his last name, but I'm familiar with that individual as well. Yes.
Mm, yep. That's the. It's yes. It's hopefully we can get all of this stuff sorted out. Now, I believe the BC family did. There was an attempted coup on the BC family. I'm not sure if it was his father because Faure, the guy who's the monarch now, I believe his father. They had an attempted coup on him. Prior to his death. Um, so say if they were to take down his dictatorship, like who would fill that gap in power?
That I don't know. Some people have a vote that they would like Sister Farida, right, to of course run for office. Right.
Oh,
Yes. And I've
okay.
spoken with her. She is extremely intelligent. I do believe that she would be competent. I'm just going to be quite honest with you. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I believe that she would be competent based on the conversations I've had with her. And of course, she's spoken around the country. Like you said, you saw the TED Talk where she was in, I believe, Norway, right?
Mm,
So, uh, but once again, that's not a decision I would want can make, will even want to make. It's not my place to, decide who runs the country. But we definitely want to have someone in a position of power who actually is going to lead and rule democratically, right?
mm.
Yeah.
Does she have any history of running an organization?
Yes. Yeah, yes, she does.
Okay.
Yes, she does.
Yeah, because it's one thing to be a good, orator, then there's another thing to be a good leader.
Correct.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
uh,
So family, yeah, this is a short show, uh, but once again, it was in my heart, right, to actually disseminate this information. And we know I've gotten some comments saying, "Listen, brother, we like the show, we happy you're back." But one of the things that is most important is that we disseminate the information that many of us don't receive, right? We know we're not going to get it from the mainstream media, or even individuals who tend to try to position themselves as someone who's black minded or be one, but aren't actually about that life, right? Uh, and then I'm not into ideological debates, so on and so forth, but really doing the work to address the material conditions of our people. And so, like I said it before, one way we can support our brothers and sisters in Togo is by supporting the Water Filters to Togo initiative, so our people can, at the very least, have clean drinking water. We know that it really is a responsibility of the government, but as I said before, the government isn't handling a BI. It's, as always, young people say, it's not giving, right? It's not giving. Uh, and so we want to try to fill that gap in any way that we can. And last but not least, let's make sure that we write our local, state representatives and senators about this issue. I'm going to do the same, so this isn't something where I'm just talking good game. You all know I've done this before, where I've written my local state representative and said, "Hey, this is a problem, right? We need to address it." And so I will push you all to do the same as well. So until next time, family, y'all know what to do. Always bet on black. Peace.
peace.
Before you go, make sure you hit the subscribe and like button. Thank you for supporting the channel. And remember, here at Lumumba Speaks, we always bet on black. Peace.